Hello and welcome to the Real Bible Rob podcast. Today, I'd like to talk about how people are responding to stress and change, and that we have a sense that something's really wrong in America. And you wouldn't be right. You wouldn't be wrong in saying that, and that we kind of all know it. And how you approach it, it tells a lot about where your perspective is. And one of the ways in which you really see it nowadays is the way in which fundamentalists or Christian nationalists are responding. And one of the most predictable things that you can possibly imagine is that the whitewashing of slavery would happen. This is a very old thing. It's usually a real marker of stress in the church, and that the church, when challenged and backed into a corner, and when I talk about church, I mean about sort of the more evangelical side, especially the Southern Baptists. When they get backed into a corner, they always go to saying, slavery wasn't so bad after all. And it's really kind of a marker. And you could say, well, okay, well, am I just being, a little mean to these folks or something like that? Or talking about old stereotypes? Not so much. It's more, like I said, a marker of a bigger problem. And that bigger problem is dealing with change. And the way you see it is when people say biblical slavery was something different, and that this becomes kind of the gateway drug for giving permission to say things that that we thought were unacceptable. For most Americans, most Americans would say, slavery is unequivocally bad. It was never good. It's not good. There's no equivocating about it at all. Can we at least agree on that? Can we at least agree that forced marriage, for example, which is also something that's very biblical, can we at least agree that forced marriage and rape is not good, even when it's portrayed as potentially good in Scripture? Can we at least agree on those things? Well, whenever you see people kind of equivocating about this, that's when it's a marker for people to say, oh, well, what's wrong with America is not that we're too tolerant, or that we're too or I should say, not intolerant. It's that we are too tolerant. That we are letting people live in sin and excuse sin and things like that. And one of the things that has come up recently, there are two big things that have come up recently. One is that Douglas Wilson, who has his own church in Moscow, Idaho, is part of a network of churches called the CREC, correct? And there's a network of churches like that, and he has his own college that he does. It seems to be a pattern among these guys, like John MacArthur does it too, is they make up their mega churches, they start publishing books, they start pontificating about things, and then they set up their own school. And well, Doug Wilson's one of these guys. He is a very far right person, and he was recently exposed a bit to at least people who don't know about him on CNN. Caitlin Collins interviewed him I think it was Caitlin Collins interviewed him a couple of weeks ago, and really showed, this guy really is that bad. He's the one that said, women are people who people come out of, if you remember that. He also advocates for women not getting removing the right to vote from women, or that women and families should vote in blocks in concert. So you can tell he's really off the deep end on the right wing. He's from a part of the country where is that kind of behavior is kind of tolerated a little bit more than some other parts of the country. But, mostly the biggest claim to fame that he has now is that one of his acolytes, one of his church members, is now the Secretary of Defense. This is Pete Hegseth. And, if you look at Pete's pictures of Pete Hegseth with his tattoos and the way he talks, you go, he very much fits into this white nationalist, Christian white nationalist way of thinking. Something that's very interesting about this is that author and pastor Brian Zond, who's pretty popular on the internet and has done a lot, he says he's never heard of Doug Wilson until a couple weeks ago when this came out, and the response to him was just fascinating. There was people on the internet saying, you've got to be kidding. I mean, Doug Wilson's one of the worst guys out there. He's been blah blah blah. Well, I totally believe Brian on this, is that most, I would say, mainline Christians, but certainly even evangelical Christians that are kind of normal, that don't live in these worlds, they don't know who Doug Wilson is. They don't know who John Piper is. They don't know who John MacArthur was. They may know MacArthur more because he's a little bit more, he published more and so forth, but still, they don't know who these bad actors are in Christianity, these sort of nationalist guys. But they do know one person, and that is James Dobson. Because James Dobson, anybody who's had kids in the last 40 years or so, 50 years, knows James Dobson because of his books, because of Focus on the Family, because of his connection to the religious right, and the Republican Party. So you can kind of go, oh, well, they know James Dobson. James Dobson, as bad as he was, and he was terrible, really terrible, traumatized a generation and a half, 2 generations of kids with discipline with fear rather than love, and this pushing of this far right agenda, and his virulent homophobia, his conversion therapy, his musing about eugenics, and his musing about races and things like that. Just an all-around horrible person who a lot of Republican politicians over the last 40 years have sucked up to, because he's very powerful and he definitely has an audience out there. Anyway, so Dobson just passed away yesterday when I'm recording this. And, a lot of the feelings come out. There are definitely those who are appalled by people celebrating his death, and there are many people who are celebrating his death because of the legacy of harm that he left behind. But I'm here to say that Dobson is kind of the tip of the iceberg. He is the prominent one. He is, one of the worst, but there is this understory of Christian leaders who really are really retrograde. So I kind of want to call them out a little bit, and I want to talk a little bit about where they've come from. A lot of us know about Jerry Falwell, but we don't know about Paul Weyrich. Jerry Falwell was the face of the religious right, really coming up in the late 1970s, and the establishment of the moral majority. This is also the period of James Dobson and the Focus on the Family and his organizations starting. So in this late 1970s, during the Carter administration, I've mentioned this before, Jimmy Carter was an evangelical Christian. Many evangelicals really celebrated him becoming president of the United States. He swept the southern states, all of the southern states, and the religious vote really went for Jimmy Carter. But by the time 1977, 78 came around, Carter wasn't going to play the evangelical power game that was going to go on. And that power game really came from people like Falwell, who it wasn't about religion. I tell you right now, it was really about civil rights and the reaction to civil rights, and that the whole development of the moral majority was in opposition, and they took on the issue of abortion in order to drive it home, in order to make it stick. And it stuck. And that's why we're here almost 50 years later dealing with the fallout of that very strong shift of evangelical Christians who used to be kind of a little bit more tolerant about many things, many social issues. As soon as they started, attaching the quote general liberalism and the social movements of the 60s and 70s, and this what they thought was a move to the left, they just jumped all in, and then of course, and it took off. So that's the era in which this comes out of, and we're still living with it today. There's a long project of what that. This is also when the Heritage Foundation comes out. So today we talk over and over about Project 2025. Well, Project 2025, there's nothing in there that's new. It's all very, very old, almost 50 years old, of things that this group of people wanted to do to the federal government, and basically wanted to take us back. And that's what we're doing right now, is we're kind of in this retrograde. So that's a lot of social history. But what I want to do, instead of, kind of relitigating that, which you may already know, I want to talk about how the bad actors come out and how we need to deal with that. Because, like I said, there's Dobson and Falwell, who are, and others like them, that are the public face that we all see, but behind them is a whole bunch of people that we have to be much more concerned with. So, Falwell had his Paul Weyrich, for example, right? And, people like Francis Schaeffer and others. Now those guys are gone. They've all passed away. So they're not there. But who do we have, and what is it today? There's a couple things that happen. Doug Wilson was platformed and given lots of support, and usually where you see that support in things like publishing and so forth, there's money behind that, and there are very rich donors in this world that put their money into these things. Doug Wilson was platformed by the Gospel Coalition, which is a website that we see. This Gospel Coalition was founded by Tim Keller. Now, usually we think of Tim Keller being a very, grandfatherly, reasonable. Yes, he's conservative. Yes, he's evangelical, but he's one of the good guys, right? Well, yeah, he's not nearly as right wing politically, but as far as theology goes, he is. He is quite right wing, and he platforms. So maybe if the words aren't coming out of his mouth, he platforms people where these vile, vile things do come out of their mouths. So he platformed Doug Wilson. He also platformed Mark Driscoll. Mark Driscoll did not start organically. Mark Driscoll got a lot of support from this network of pastors and that church. Another person that platformed Wilson and people like Driscoll was John Piper. John Piper in Minnesota. Piper is a friend of and a colleague of Wayne Grudem, who now is in Arizona. And, basically the two of those guys came up with the CBMW, which is the Council on Biblical Manhood and Womanhood, which is basically wants to make all women into trad wives again. And don't believe, and pushing very hard against the equality of women, and extremely hard against women being in the ministry. So one of the reasons why you see such a hard pushback on women in the ministry comes from these folks and from this organization. So between Piper and Grudem, who provided some of the intellectual background, because both of these gentlemen are quite well educated. I wouldn't call them biblical scholars, certainly not Grudem. But Grudem wrote the theology textbook that most evangelical Bible college type students read about systematic theology. And of course, Piper had written quite a bit about, and he has his Desiring God. He talks about something called Christian hedonism. And he is a 5-point Calvinist, double predestination, very hardcore Calvinist. And his website and his organization is called Desiring God. So these may be very familiar. Some of the results of these may be familiar too, like Desiring God and so forth. And they're kind of bringing up their young people. So, Grudem's in his 70s, Piper's in his 80s. Tim Keller passed away a couple of years ago, so he's gone. Now Dobson's gone, right? John MacArthur passed away last month. So that old guard of folks are gone, but they have a couple of people that are really coming up behind them. So people like Doug Wilson, who's in his 60s. You have somebody like Paul Washer, who's a very prominent evangelist. He's not really connected to the network, but he definitely has that philosophy that like they do, and he's in his 60s. And then you have Joe Rigney. And Joe Rigney is part of the Desiring God, so he's clearly in place. And then you have somebody named Kevin DeYoung, and Kevin DeYoung is pretty much taken over the, and he's a younger guy too, like Joe Rigney. I don't know exactly what their ages are, 40s or 50s, but they're not, they'll be around a long time. And Kevin DeYoung has pretty much taken over the Gospel Coalition. It has pretty much become the replacement for Keller, but he is on the committee for the English Standard Version of the Bible now. So DeYoung has his tentacles in a lot of different places. There are a lot of other more minor characters, people like James White, who's a really obnoxious apologist, and then there's Owen Strahan, who's kind of has his own seminary that he started up, and But I consider these, and he also took over the CBMW for a while. He might still be in charge of that. And these are pretty young guys. So Owen Strahan's a much younger guy, for example. So they're there. The thing that's very important is you need to understand that there is this group of people. There was the old guard. The old guard is dying. There are a few people in their 60s, and there are some younger guys too that are coming up behind them and have this really retrograde, complementarian type philosophy. Now, this is the group of people and you see their acolytes on social media quite a bit. This is the group of people that, if you ask a couple very basic questions, is slavery sin? And they will stumble and they'll equivocate like you can't believe it. They'll start saying, well, the biblical slavery is much different. These are also the people that will use comments about the war on woke. Woke is this huge problem. Diversity, empathy, DEI, diversity, equality, and inclusion programs, and which of course has been platformed so much by the Trump administration. And each of these, so there are a lot of forces that are trying to take us back. You can say, how are they doing it, or why are they doing it? There's this general feeling among this crowd is that America has lost, that it has lost its way. You can't underestimate the fact that Obama became president. That became it was very offensive to a lot of people in this group of people. You can't underestimate the fact that under Obama, even though Obama did not support gay marriage, under Obama, the Supreme Court in 2015 rendered the Obergefell decision, which made same-sex marriage legal in all 50 states. That was seismic in this world. And it was what gave a lot of the energy to elect Trump, number one, and gave a lot of the energy to this group of people to take action and saying, see, we told you so. And that's what we've seen for the last decade. We've seen a lot of, see, I told you so. So the question is, where are we going to go from here? And how can we see history a little bit different? I have a favorite TikToker that I follow, and I love her material. Her handle is OhMelYeah, and I'm hoping that someday I can get an interview her on this podcast. The thing that really gets me about what she says, and she just said it recently, she said, the only way through our current times, the only way is through. Not to avoid, not to whitewash things, not to go around, is through. We have to go through this pain. We have to go through this period in order to get to a place of more equality, a place of more peace. Because you can say, well, the society changed in a very threatening way for Christians, especially very conservative Christians, and they'll place it all on that. What that does is that ignores the fact that there's been a 50-year project to undo the social change that came in the 60s in terms of civil rights, in terms of women's rights. So to say that it's all based on just the last decade, especially about LGBTQ people, which they would think is symptomatic of the fall of society, and go, no. That's one way to look at it, but you also have to realize that the real power is not with the, quote, liberals. That's just social change. That's long-term people becoming educated, becoming more empathetic and seeing the world differently. That's one thing. But there's been this project to arrest that, to stop it, to reverse things going on. So what I love about Mel's stuff is she talks about from a black perspective, because Mel is an African American, and she talks about it in a way that white liberals especially. So it's not just quote white people, or certainly white conservatives, because they are just who they are. But she says that it's a lot of this has to do with the way white people who I would call these ordinary people who don't know who these Christian pastors are, these bad actors, but even liberal people that aren't even in that world at all, they're shocked. Especially white liberals, especially with the 2024 election. You thought, well, we saw that how bad things were previously. Why would we ever want to go back, especially with all the threatening information about what's going to come up with Project 2025, some of the overt racism that we've seen, and some of the threats of the way immigrants are going to be treated, and a lot of that stuff's coming true. Well, I'm shocked. Why? How could my fellow Americans be so bad? Well, from the African American perspective, you go, well, this is news to you? I mean, my gosh, this is we're just seeing you are just seeing what we've been seeing all along. And actually, she presents a strong feeling of optimism out of this. because it's reckoning. We're in the midst of a reckoning. And certainly we're in the midst of a racial reckoning and seeing that, yes, the structures and the way people deal with racism really are that bad, and people really are that racist. That's not really a surprise. But also there's a religious reckoning, and she doesn't speak as much about that, but there's definitely an overtone of that too, is that so much of our religion is based on this. The Southern Baptist Convention is there because it defends Jim Crow. It was there as a result of an anti-abolition backlash. That's why we have the Southern Baptist Convention. And even though it had moderated over the decades, after civil rights in the 60s and with the rise of the religious right, it took a sharp right-hand turn again, especially on issues like abortion, for example. Southern Baptist Convention and people like Billy Graham, for example, were not anti-abortion at all until the 70s, until it became the cause célèbre for them. So that's not really all that surprising that there would be that kind of, that there would be a backlash against these things. But the religious backlash comes from the idea that we are especially the white church, we're really comfortable with the way things were. My own denomination, the Presbyterian Church USA, a lot of people in my denomination are very comfortable with what they thought and the way things were in the 50s and 60s when the denomination was thriving. There are a lot of Methodists that feel this way. There are a lot of Lutherans that feel this way. A lot of mainliners, even though they are generally more progressive, even though they're generally more willing to take up social issues, still hearken back to these warm feelings about the past for a lot of reasons. Now, those people who have those feelings are now elderly, and they won't be here much longer. So you have to say, well, and there's this impression, partly due to people like James Dobson and the strong rise in megachurches and evangelicalism in the last 50 years. You got to say, well, what's the future of the church? Is there any change that's going to happen? Well, the question really is, I think it's a mixed bag. And I've spoken about this on other podcasts, but it's kind of a mixed bag. Is there more deconstructing that's going to go on? Is the mainline church going to lose members? Yes, for a while, because younger folks haven't found what they want in the mainline denominations by and large. There's some hopes. There are hopes, and there are signs of life here and there, but the trend continues. It's flattening. And that flattening does give a lot of hope to people, in that maybe now that people see what some of these other Christian organizations are really like under stress, meaning really right-wing, far more right-wing than they ever suspected, maybe there is an opportunity for people to find the more traditional churches again. And we don't know if that's going to happen. But the reason why this is so important, this is the reason why this idea of the only way is through is so important, is that the church, including not only the non-denominational churches that are of a certain type, but including the mainline churches, including the Catholic Church, including Orthodox churches, well-established churches, have to go through the next period. They have to get beyond some of the sinister, really racist, retrograde people that we are dealing with today. The people like the Doug Wilsons and the Pipers, and what Dobson represented, and what John MacArthur represented, and their acolytes that are coming up. Are they going to gain power? Are they going to get, or not? Well, it's very messy. But the thing that I ask of you, and that I would encourage anybody to do, is to know who these people are and know their names, and not get discouraged by them, because they are part of the reason why we don't know about them very much is because they don't really catch on. And the more that people, especially when they listen to what Doug Wilson says on CNN, for example, they're repelled. They're awful. They're terrible. They excuse slavery. They want to take women backwards. They want to take rights away. And they believe it whole hog. Don't be surprised when things like contraception go away. Don't be surprised if same-sex marriage gets reversed. Don't be surprised if the rights of women, economic health for women, for things like credit and being able to vote freely and a whole bunch of things. Don't be surprised if some of these things start slipping away, because that's their project. That's what they want to do. So instead of being surprised, just realize that it's there, know their names, and oppose them and move forward. Because the only way through this is to go through, not avoid it, not go back, not go around. So with that, I hope that this is has some feeling of possibility for you, that there is this sense of a mission, maybe, to not get discouraged too much, because it isn't any worse than it was 10 years ago. We just see it a lot more, honestly. And that's what I'm hoping that I learn more from Mel and other people who speak about this. So with that, I'll say, people say lots of things about the Bible. People say lots of things about religion that aren't really there, that people use religion in a very, very bad way. People like Dobson, in my opinion, a truly evil character who used religion to push a very toxic, terrible theology and a way of parenting that a lot of people suffered under, and the people around him that were like him they're pushing something that's not really there. It's not really there. So with that, I say, keep your chin up, go forward. We'll talk more about it in the future, and God bless you.